I love that. Okay, we're live. We're live here. So we're going to actually do that. um, I don't. I'm going to be Tim, but I know that it was all Tim in that scenario. But leading us through the structure of the gameplay because we do have a scenario that we want to discuss. So it's most helpful when you have a question or there's some kind of friction or there is a problem, an issue that you're going through when you're doing this gameplay. So increased scrutiny, we decided on, or we focused on increased scrutiny for to kind of set the stage. So, what's happening, what feels unresolved, and then boundary mode is really important because if you see the how we win, we're not willing to do this even if it means this. So I think that we need to all be ending on that statement that we are in together. So it's communications, engagement, and operations. So the first set of cards that we're going to go through, and it's important that we reach consensus, and I want both of you to talk through this. I'm not going to lead you. I'm just going to sort of navigate it for you. The first set of cards, and the problem is I can't see this here. Let's see. I can't read that. Can you
I'll
both
read.
read
I'll
those?
read. I'll read them.
Okay, I don't know why
Wait.
my screen is
Wait
so
for
small.
all good. Wait for. Well, you can collapse that black bar, by the way, Julia. That has all that.
All right, I can read it now.
Okay. Well, see, there we go. Okay, I'm back into my little hobbit hole. Bye, folks.
Tech issues. So we want to be reaching consensus on where we are in terms of communication. So the scenario, actually, Greg, could you talk about the issue that you were running into that you're kind of looking for help with?
Sure. And I think there's this sort of the specific example that we had started to envision and the kind of broader issue. And these cards, I think, relate to both of those. But basically, as our organization is starting to grow our audience on social media, we've got people on our team who are advocating for us taking more really honest and bold positions about sort of foundational societal issues related to our mission that are, these kind of hot button topics that are really the root causes of things going on related to our mission. And as we start to lean into that, some of our sponsors and funders have started to reach out and say, hey, wait a minute, we think we've noticed some of the stuff that you're posting. Oh, and we've launched this new campaign. So we've said, we're going to identify 10 of the, our 10 keep it real list of ways that, wealthy or powerful companies have been causing issues, related to our mission. And we've rolled out the first 2 or 3. And we hear from a funder or some of the funders saying, like, this is not really the stuff that we want to be associated with. We're all about the feel good stories of your mission, but we want you to tamp down with this how sort of provocative the what you're putting out on social media is. And so sort of broadly, how do we handle that? And with this specific funder, how do we handle that?
Oh, I think that's a scenario that we can all relate to. And I kind of want to set the stage here. The two of you just met. So are we like at a conference and maybe you saw Kate speak and you're kind of reaching out to her for some help? Are we at a coffee shop? Are we at a bar? Like where are we playing this game? What do you two think?
So Kate, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that. I will say one of the things I thought, I wasn't sure about that either. And I thought, I wonder if Kate is, I knew that in your current role, I wonder if you're going to be a board member or just someone who I run into externally at a conference. And my first thought was, because it'll be a totally different conversation in each of those scenarios.
Mhm.
And then my second thought was, well, should it be a totally different conversation? Is that a problem? That my first thought was that it would be a totally different conversation in each of those scenarios. So I'm curious, Kate, if you have if you had envisioned it a particular way, it's being on, in your current capacity, being on the board of our entity, or the sort of like over drinks at a conference type of conversation.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking like, yeah, over some type of beverage at a conference,
Mhm.
simply because that is where I tend to have like really upfront, really dig into different topics with people. Like my favorite thing is just having like that free space at conferences to
Me too.
talk to someone about a problem, share what we're going through, vent to each other. So yeah, I was thinking, maybe the coffee break at a conference or
Let's do
something
it.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just attended your NTC talk that was already been raved about, and say, oh, I've got to pull her aside if I get a chance and pick her brain about this issue.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
do think it's an issue that is a lot of people are dealing with right now. And I actually think that Kate is kind of uniquely positioned because I'm sure she runs into this as well. So for the two of you, I don't think this is going to be hard because you're both evaluators and you're both, trying to help each other. But which card seems to be the consensus for both of you in terms of like how to move forward with the scenario? So it's like wait for full internal consensus before sharing news publicly, limit public storytelling to successful outcomes, or publish updates in real time, prioritizing speed over polish. And you can sort of wordsmith these.
Kate, I'm curious what your initial thoughts are.
Yeah, I would lean most to the first one of waiting for internal consensus. I think the other two, the limiting public storytelling to successful only, is definitely not the way to go right now. I think particularly like people want authenticity. They want to hear real stories. Only hearing like successful polished stuff is not the way to build trust with an audience. But I also sometimes think that going too real time and too fast is not the way to go. So I think I'd lead towards the internal consensus because, like, at least as an organization, if you're agreed, you're in a much stronger position to then have those conversations with a sponsor.
What do you think, Greg?
Totally agree. I think the real question then is sort of like, what does internal consensus? How do you get that? What does it look? My first thought when I first read that one was, yes, except does that even really exist? And I totally agree as well with what you said, Kate. I mean, a lot of what our whole thing is, how is the inherited traditional nonprofit playbook shifting into a new future ready approach? And I think the middle card was the inherited nonprofit playbook.
Mhm.
Everything is always really curated. There's never an issue. It's always very controlled storytelling that's safe, and that people are sick of that, and that it doesn't resonate. And so then the question is sort of like, okay, well, if we're not doing that, what are we doing instead? Do we go entirely in that direction? And that the algorithm loves when you totally keep it real, when you're totally honest, and but while that might do well on social, does it? What about the other consequences that it has? So yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what internal consensus should really look like as the ED, who, especially, I mean, even the word internal, like if we're talking about our board and our staff, overall, the staff, is the one saying like, we've got to take a stand. We've got to be the ones putting it out there. We've got to be holding power accountable. And the board is the one saying like, well, these are our funders. This is, so any thoughts on what the internal consensus process for an ED balancing those two sets of stakeholders should even look like? And is that the right question?
Sure.
I think that's a huge question. And I think it's a really important one of defining consensus. in a previous position I was in, we had a board member lose it on Facebook because of a post that we made. And it was very public that this board member was unhappy with us. But because the organization had already agreed that this content was important, and we had buy-in from other board members, we were able to very quickly shut it down. And other board members kind of came to the rescue to be like, hey, this was agreed upon. There was consensus. Please quiet down.
Mhm.
And so
I see that
do
on the
think,
school board all the time.
yeah,
It's like, we voted on this. Sorry. We agreed.
yeah, I think it is, coming up with what is comfortable for each organization of, running things by, being like, here's what we're going to do, and having that conversation before anything goes out, so that when it does go out, there is a comfort level. Candid has been pushing the boundaries a little bit on things that can feel comfortable and not comfortable over the past year, but it was all very much agreed upon. We set boundaries. And so I think, if it feels like the board should be involved, maybe it's having that conversation with them and just picking whatever consensus fits. Yeah.
And I would say, even going into the next step of engagement, peeling back the onion even further, what seems to be the next step here? Some roles are informal and relationship based. There are collaborations with a wide range of partners. Supporters are invited to engage in a variety of ways. You can interpret them however you want.
Yeah, I would be curious, even Kate, when you said that, that incident that you were describing, but it was protected by the idea that consensus had already been reached. Looking at these three versions, I'm curious what that consensus had looked like. And I think, Julia, you said, well, we've got to vote. Was there an actual vote on the actual sort of guidelines around the content, or because so many of these, it's often some roles end up being informal. Everything is relationship based. What did it look like for you all that provided that protection that helped in that scenario?
Yeah. I think with all of these, I think the third one, supporters invited to engage in a variety of ways, is how we've gone about it. Of the team working on the content has come up with, here's what we think is the appropriate way to take this. It's then been brought to who's the next level that actually has power to shoot it down or change it or bring up red flags. Then, the next level is more all right, we've gotten this mostly approved by everyone. We're more informing you that this is the route that we're going to take. If you have a huge issue with it or a red flag we missed, bring it up. But I think it's, at each level, giving them less, it's more informing versus participatory. And so that's how it worked. Is this was a museum, and so at that organization, it was, the communications team worked with the curators and the artists, came to a consensus, which was presented to the rest of staff, who all agreed. Some brought up red flags, but we dealt with them. And then, that's presented to the board more as an informed, hey, this is what we're doing. Now is the time to say if there's something really wrong with it, but we're not looking for feedback.
We're not looking for feedback. I love that. That's so hard to do.
It reminds me of a framework called RACI, RACI. You know this one? We started using that. So it's a responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And so you define in any given project who's responsible for this, actually doing the work, who's accountable for the results of it, who's going to be consulted, and who's just going to be sort of informed. And so often the sort of the roles that are in your job description are kind of one thing, but more nebulous. But within a specific project, we started using that more and more at my last organization, even kind of informally, of just, at the start of something, writing at the top of a document, okay, who's going to be responsible for this? Who's going to be accountable? who's going to be consulted and who's just going to be informed, and helping to clean that up for everybody involved.
I need to do that like in my family. You're just being informed, Mom. I don't need your opinion on, whatever is happening.
It looks like Catherine in the chat says that she loves a good racy chart.
Loves a racy chart.
We probably weren't even using it as sort of officially as it should be. And
it's just clear. It's clear as kind, it's just clear.
Mm-hmm.
So are you in consensus on supporters are invited to engage in a variety of ways?
Some rules informal. There are collaborators with a wide range of partners. They're pretty similar. I feel like I'm on number 3 as well. That's probably the most important out of all of them.
And then now we are into the operationalizing, sort of like what is the way forward? And it could be all 3 of these, it could be 2 of these, it could be none of them. But empowers staff to act immediately on new opportunities, outsource core operational functions to specialized vendors, or we review all new opportunities for alignment before responding. And I would say the we is you and your internal staff, but you can think of we as anything you want.
Yeah, which one immediately speaks to you, Greg, in the situation?
Number 1.
Number 1?
A big part of one of our main sort of leadership and cultural tenets at my last organization that we put in place was the idea that, really, it kind of goes back to that racy idea, but empowering the person who's going to be doing the work and who's sort of on the line for what the results are, being the primary person who sort of gets empowered to make those decisions. And as the ED, a kind of like informal litmus test that I always used when I always had beliefs, as the strong judgment evaluator person, I had my opinions on what I think, thought should happen, but I was always a big believer if I was going to overrule somebody on my team when they thought that something should happen differently than my opinion, my rule of thumb was always, am I so sure that I'm right and I'm so sure that it matters that it is worth disempowering this person and this sort of like motivational hit that it is going to take to them on our team for me overruling them. And when you use that framework, there were only a handful of times in my 9-year career, I think, that I sort of was like, okay, I'm so sure that I'm right about this, and I'm so sure that this matters, that I'm sort of like playing the overrule card, which, is like the third one isn't, it's just reviewing opportunities together and whatnot. But I was a big believer in empowering people. Kate, what about you?
I'm leaning towards the third one. I think I love the idea of empowering people to, take action and do things immediately. And I think that is really important, especially like if you want psychological safety and you want folks who aren't burning out. But I think if we're talking about content that could potentially be compromising or is pushing buttons or is pushing kind of comfort levels a little, I think there is something to making sure that there's alignment and really being thoughtful about it. And this is probably where my like red flag Debbie Downer thing comes in, of just like I've seen too much on X.
Oh.
So usually my job right now is to be the person who comes in and goes like, well, here's what Elon Musk is talking about this week, and here's how it's going to affect our nonprofit, and here's why you shouldn't do this project right now. And so I think having those moments to like align and be like, all right, this topic is important. Is now the right moment though? A really great example, every year Candid publishes a report about compensation for nonprofit CEOs. And it's a great resource for nonprofit CEOs to be able to, argue for better salaries, to check to make sure that they're in line. But that data is currently being used on X to show why nonprofits are basically like money-making fraud machines.
Oh God.
And so people will argue and be like, you know, this nonprofit volunteer is making $80,000 a year. And it's like, but that's not even like a living wage where they are in California. And so we actually had made the decision to not promote the report as much as we usually would because of
Because
the
people are
environment.
weaponizing it.
Yep,
Mhm.
people
For
are
their own
taking the
agenda.
data and they're using it in really bad ways. And so, like, had we just kind of done our usual thing and just been like, all right, let's get this all out, we might have put out all this ammunition for people. But instead of like having that moment to align and be like, do we actually want that information out there right now? It was really helpful because we were able to catch something that we wouldn't normally have. So yeah, I'm
Well,
thinking
I see those two cards as very similar. So empowering staff to act immediately, that could be like the action could be reviewing it for alignment. Do you know what I mean? So what I see
Mhm.
is empowering staff to act immediately could be, okay, they say no, they say pause, they say let's go forward with it. And I think I'm just giving my opinion. I mean, there's no right or wrong. But if you have the full internal consensus and you have the engagement and the input from your supporters, then I think the action could be review for alignment. So I kind of see them as combined, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm curious and would have a hunch, but in that scenario that you were talking about, Kate, how much did that revelation or the theory about how that data was being used, how much did that come from sort of top down versus bottom up of, you know, the person who was executing saying like, hey, this is what I'm seeing is happening with this versus at a higher level, if you recall.
Yeah, it was me that raised it. So,
Yeah.
so middle up, middle
Yeah.
to the sides. Yeah.
It also
God,
makes me
so
think of
unfortunate.
something that you would probably have. I'm curious if you have professional expertise on that. I always just wonder, but like brands, you know, outside of nonprofit that take really bold positions on social media sometimes, whether it's just like a snarky comment that goes viral or a you know, anything that's sort of particularly bold and takes off. I always am curious how many lines of approval that had to go through, especially when
Me
it's like
too.
a comment on somebody else. Like when one brand posts something and the other,
Like
another
Wendy's
brand,
making a snarky comment to Taco Bell or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it feels like something where the higher up the chain, the approval, you know, would have to be, the less likely that would get approved. That somebody would say like, "Is this really what we want to be doing?" And I'm always curious how much kind of you know, leeway those folks are given and guidelines to operate within that. And of course, they're have a lot less risk of, you know, they're able to take more chances. But do you know kind of like how that tends to happen?
It's so different per organization. I think it happens in both ways. If you have, you know, teams with lots of approval processes, but they're fast anyway. Like they
Mhm.
know that's how it works. And so they're going to be fast. Like, you know, the Wendy's shift was something
Mhm.
that was planned. Versus like Duolingo's TikTok was literally one woman who was like, we're going to take this in a different direction and see how that goes. And that became Duolingo's personality.
And what is it? I'm not familiar with that one.
Duolingo,
I know
um,
the app, but what's their
oh,
TikTok?
their TikTok is just, well, it was just very like unhinged weirdness. A lot of stuff with like people in the owl costume, like doing weird things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, you know, when people are able to like move quickly and be empowered, it is because they already have that like internal consensus and they have like they know what the good boundaries are and where they can go. Um so yeah, I think it's both ways.
I think it's both. And Tim, what happens if we want to merge both cards?
You can.
Can
I
we
mean,
do that?
it's a collaborative storytelling.
And I know we're
game.
at time.
At time-ish. I just, I think there's a
It's
difference
such great
between.
conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that felt like we're hanging out at a conference and we can take it anywhere. But we also have like dozens of people who were also here to learn. So I want to like shift into maybe
Okay.
the facilitation. So it's kind of sounds like almost what was kind of cool about your interpretation is like these two almost represent
Mhm.
this. And the way that I would read the cards, because now we're going to shift into kind of like we're kind of in game. If you go like this, by the way, you're talking as yourself. That's like a dumb thing in the game that I've designed where you put your fist on your head. So we're like shifting into Kate and Greg and Julia and Tim as ourselves, by the way.
Yes.
And Greg's phone. And
Sorry.
so
I thought it
that's
was
all good.
mine.
That's hilarious. So I'm gonna kind of just for tracking sake, I'm gonna take a picture of this because one of the things that I'm doing is everything that we've discussed is rooted in philanthropic psychology. The reasons that people make decisions there's a science behind this. And so the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy kind of gives some guardrails. All I've done is turn it into like a fun little game per se. So would we say this is like, we could talk about how we're going to set boundaries in the next section for a few minutes before we shift into speed networking. But are we good with this? Do we have consensus? Good.
Yeah.
I'm going to do the thing that I forgot to do the first time, Julia, because we're done with the game, right? We're done with this. We're going to
Yes.
lock it in.
Lock it
About 25 minutes, we're going to flip the table. We're done. Okay? So there we go.